Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Risk, where our mission is to engage, inspire, and empower the global community of risk practitioners. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and today I'm super excited to welcome my guest, Gene Blom. Now, Gene has a lot of experience with risk management, and when I met with him in Amsterdam, safety risk management, I was really struck by his curiosity about every topic related to risk management and also his openness to engage in a very open and casual conversation, which helps everyone to build a better understanding and not get into arguments or anything like that. So that is what I was really struck by. I'm super excited to welcome Gene today to hear from him his experience practicing risk management in our industry, challenges, lessons learned, what he has seen. With that, Gene, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hello, Naveen. I'm quite well. I've had an excellent day today, and I'm looking forward to our talk.
Wonderful. So, Gene, why don't we start by having you share your own journey with risk management? Tell us how you got started.
I got started in MedTech in 2012, so that was just as the European version of the 14971 2007 came out. Had its own peculiar deviations to deal with for a while. I started at a startup. And perhaps contrary to some other people, my first risk management document to deal with was not an FMEA, but it was a brain map. So we had engineers and developers and the founders of the business, and they developed risk management with a focus on the hazards that existed and in the spots in the device where that occurred, and they managed the risk from there. We went through the certification audit. I was doing the quality aspect, so I had to be able to understand everything, explain it, show how it meets requirements, and perhaps my understanding of a standard not being a single thing you can follow, but having different perspectives already started there.
Wow. So it sounds like you were in some ways very lucky to get started on the right foot there. Many times we get stuck with these FMEAs bottom up, and then we are trying to reconcile everything. So this seems to me a very nice opportunity for you. In that environment, what did you really appreciate the most about the standard as it was written versus also challenges that you might have faced at that time? Can you share some examples?
In the beginning, and I was still for a while at university while I was doing this, because this was a full-time job next to some stuff from university that I had to finish off. I appreciated the fact that if you looked at the flow diagram in those days, that certain steps in the flow of the standard referred to certain sections of the standard where it was mentioned in detail. And only later, as I became more experienced, I realized actually that does feel comfortable, because that's how we're used to text being read, especially fiction, and also textbooks at universities. But if you look at real life, actually, the things we're describing are not all that linear. I mean, we're starting now on this point of the talk. People will not know that by the end of the talk, we might be discussing different perspectives, not that of a startup and a person starting out, but someone at the end of it, either looking at it from a director's perspective, an auditor's or a certificate decision maker's perspective, because you don't know. If you go through the text, you do it linearly. But in the beginning, that's what I needed, some structure to it.
So let's talk about that, because, of course, the standard has evolved and we have evolved with it. A lot of us have practiced this for a long time. But my personal journey was also, in a way, similar, because I found in the beginning the standard and the risk management process, everything to be quite overwhelming. A lot of detail, how to manage this. Tell us a little bit more about how you overcame that from your experience and what you observe these days when you come across just people just starting out. What are some of the things that they find most challenging?
So my major challenge was actually daily having to deal with an aspect of risk that isn't the natural way to think about risk. The first device I dealt with was an active diagnostic device. So the chance of direct harm, especially since it was battery powered, low voltage, etc., was quite low. But the chance of information being inaccurate or wrong or non-timely, and that resulting in a risk, wasn't natural. So I had to think deep about those aspects. And while I was thinking about that, I had to reconsider the foundations of risk management. And I think that there I also started studying far older standards of risk management that the founders had available in their collection. And I found out that we had already spent quite a long time developing risk management. And by the time 2019 came along, we had developed it even further.
You bring up a good point about diagnostic devices where we struggle a little bit because we cannot build the sequence of events all the way. But we are very aware of the problems that inaccurate, late information can actually cause. So let's dig deeper into that a little bit, because I know a lot of our colleagues might be facing that same scenario, especially now that we have so many different devices coming out, right? Sort of AI, ML based, and what they're trying to do is alert us to something, whether it's diagnosis or detection. So we are living in a world where we'll see more of it. So I think this is a very interesting topic to talk about. You gave a reference to that some other standards were available to you at that time. In what way did that help you, or what new insights did you gain from them?
Some of the insights I gained back then was also the, in essence, history of risk management originating from, and that was the part that I saw. I'm not saying this is the complete true development of it, but from NASA and the way it developed, for example, the aspects of FMEA, and that they had outsourced certain aspects of design. If you looked at the Saturn V rocket, Saturn V, we couldn't build it nowadays because information was lost. When we had the disaster with the space shuttle, with the O-ring, the information had to flow between multiple parties. And suddenly you understand that the legacy methods that we are using actually have attributes in them that were meant for interactions between companies. Well, these days, a lot of the time we do risk management within a single company. They were especially developed as a project-based risk management because they didn't have continuous post-market surveillance towards the public. They were trying to get a mission done, which was a project perspective. And they were learning from previous projects, but it was a different feel to it. If you look at the FMEA standard as it is now, there are aspects there where it says like, okay, and then you'll define necessary actions. Necessary actions to what, to where, and how do you clean them up once they're no longer necessary? So that's legacy things that you only understand if you look at them in the history aspect. And if you don't know about that, then these days, if you read that standard and you try to implement that, you get stuck. Because you're like, I have a piece of a puzzle and I don't know where it goes. Taking that evolution of the system and being aware that I was still in a system that was evolving into the 2019. When that came along, I did a letter by letter comparison just to be able to understand. But then I missed something. I had the delta at a character level that I typed. And I tried to interpret what the changes meant. And some of the changes were changes in sequence of a mention. So they didn't change, in essence, what was stated, but the order in which it was stated. But what does that mean in a standard? A lot of the time, we're missing the purpose of what we're doing. We're only told what to do, but not what for. And what for is essential, especially if you're beginning out or when it's something new, to get a grips with the situation and to evaluate yourself and telling yourself, okay, now I know what to do or I'm progressing, instead of being stuck in an uncertain world.
Yeah. I think you bring up an excellent point. Is the context. Context matters a lot. So the context of the world that we live in today is very different from what it was 15, 20 years ago, or even 30 years ago. And sometimes the standards keep up, sometimes they don't. I mean, case in point, 2019 is when for the first time ISO 14971 defined the term benefit. Like, how can we do risk management without understanding the balance between benefit and risk, right? But to me, it's so new. It's not that long ago. And many other things evolve. So I love this perspective of evolution and building up that context. So tell us a little bit more about what you have seen folks who deal with risk management, just early in their careers. How do they deal with this gap in the context and this understanding? Can you share some examples of what you have seen?
So the company I'm at now deals a lot with startups, and these startups often come from academic circles, or they at least have a founder's perspective as innovation. So they have an engineering background. They're not afraid to read the standard. Some of them have read it, some of them haven't read it because they didn't know it existed. But it isn't about fear of the contents. And then you get to talking about the definitions, and you find out that to us, who evolved with the definitions, who've seen it in practice, we've gotten to grips with what they mean. and what you can do with them and what you shouldn't do with them if they occur. But to them, you need to translate it. One of the risk management trainings I'm developing now for a specific client makes reference to the fact that we are very familiar with risk management, even if we think we aren't, but we take it from the perspective of going to the movies. If you see a boulder rolling towards Indiana Jones, you see a hazard, you see a hazardous situation, you see the potential for harm, and you have an emotion with that. And suddenly things start clicking, because if you see certain lists in the standard and you simply go, well, what do I do with something that's called, name it, high voltage hazard? What do you do with that? Well, you don't know. But what do you say, like standing under a tree when there's a lightning storm going on? Well, you say, don't do that because it might hit you. Other things that help is to tell them that risks don't exist. So the core thing that we always say is there's risks management, manage for risk. The risks must be acceptable. But the risk isn't the thing that you have much control over, if any. The things when you are developing your devices, and especially those first devices, you have control over, that's the hazards that are in the device. And those are the hazards that might be in there because you need them, like a sharp edge because the device needs to puncture skin. It might be the hazards that you need for the mode of operation, even if you don't need them for the function in the body. And it might be the hazards that are not in the device, but which might develop because it's failing due to age or it's shattering what it wasn't supposed to shatter. Hazards then suddenly become tangible instead of risks. Risks occur, they happen, but they don't exist. And hazard exists, and hazardous situations where a hazard is exposed, that exists. And that gives people in startups something to work with. Because if you start on, well, you have to manage your risks and they have to be acceptable, you have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
Expert might know it. You and I know it. But if you're just starting out, the standard expects you to do it, but it doesn't give you that what for, that ability to say, well, you have managed risks. But you can tell yourself, I have managed hazards.
No, this is a great point. We're going to dig into this a little bit more in our conversation today. Guys, if you're just joining us now, welcome to all of you. Please note that this is a very casual, informal conversation and you are a part of it. So make sure that you are sharing your perspective, comments, insights. Opinions are welcome. Anything that you have come across in the practice of risk management in your area of work, please share that. Please share the challenges you have seen and the solutions that you have come up with, because that's how we can learn from each other. So, Gene, let's continue our conversation. I think you have touched upon a lot of interesting points that I've been thinking about. And your point about risks don't exist is a very interesting perspective and a correct one, because we play this game of what if all the time, trying to imagine what might happen. But I think your focus on hazards is absolutely the right focus, because we have a better understanding of that. Hazards are present by default, by design. Without that, we can't have a product or a solution. And it's our responsibility to understand the nature of that hazard and under what circumstances it might become what I call, in my language, activated, from a potential to an activation, and what happens then. So tell us a little bit more about any specific example that comes to your mind when it comes to, understanding these hazards and their relationship to potential harms.
Let's see. We could, for example, have a look. I can't talk about the clients due to NDA, but there are some public cases that we know of. Many of us know. If we look at the CPAP story with Philips, much has been written about it, but one of the core things that was going on was the presence of black particles that had to be cleaned out regularly. Like, people did not realize the risks, but if we would have seen that for what they were, in essence, that is a hazard, and it's in a place where you might ingest it, so that's part of the hazardous situation, then that's something that we can use to teach people about how to look at stuff. When you're trying to teach your kid about aspects, you do not want to teach them by the harm actually occurring. You want to use examples that they can understand and which they can perceive with the senses that they have. So there's also the thing with the Ferric 25, where you have other biases going on. The Ferric 25, this was the linear accelerator that had quite a few issues, which was also the reason for the MDD in part, at least. It was built by one person. Well, not built, the software was programmed by one person. There was a lot of reliance and there was a lot of bias in, well, it cannot be wrong. But they made a switch between models where they removed some of the hardware safety controls controls. And then suddenly you realize, okay, but what does a hardware safety control now do? Well, it was in essence managing a hazardous situation. So I'm trying to teach people to look at how are we trying to change the world, because by that we change the hazards or the hazardous situations. And the intent of that eventually is to influence risks. But when you tell people, okay, but you must manage the risks, and based on the chance that a risk occurs, you will decide which hazard you will be managing the risks for by taking actions. And you take actions at the design level by addressing the hazards and the design aspects. So eliminating risks by design. Is it in the device at all? If you eliminate it at the manufacturer level at design, then you're dealing with the fact of removing hazards that you might introduce while you don't want to. These could be particles. That's why we build clean rooms. We clean devices. We do ultrasonic cleaning. We then go through a clean room and it's a magical box. And at the end, we have faith. But if you would ask anybody, like, is that device actually fully clean? Then nobody could fairly give you an answer.
Excellent
point.
point.
Know that it works.
So Raymond has a comment here. Hazards are a manifestation of uncertainty. It is uncertainty that creates the opportunity to risk. To properly handle risk, we need to learn and become better at contending with uncertainty. I think that's an interesting point, because uncertainty is hard for people to understand and appreciate and even quantify. But what I'm hearing you say, Gene, is that if we talk about risk in the context of something that people can perceive, whether, touch it, feel it, sense it, smell it, if they see black particles in a place where it's not supposed to be there, the emotional response will come out, right? And you will act on it. Yes. And you will try to understand that. Whereas if we ask them to envision what hazardous situations could happen, what harms could happen, I think people are not going to perceive it, and they will just imagine things, right? Or they need to talk to somebody who has experienced it in the field, like a clinician.
And it's one of those things that's also always in the field, because those stories happen in the outside world. They don't always enter into the engineering department or the risk management department. You either have a complaints unit, if you're lucky, because they are at least familiar with some aspects of risk management. But sometimes a news story goes live and then it's a director or a chief compliance officer looking at it, or you get a file coming in and you have a certificate decision maker at a certification body having to decide, well, is this issue with risk management something that will actually be a risk to society? Because they cannot decide at a personal level. Things might happen, and you cannot, when you're at that distance, protect everybody separately. But you do have to look at it in a sense and be able to imagine the impact on the greater good. It's also why I think we've spent a lot of time and text in the MDR as well on those risks that can affect large amounts of people, like when you have a transmissible public health risk. But those are not necessarily the risks that occur the most. Those are not the hazards that are present the most. So we talk about them a lot. They get attention a lot at that level. But then when you're actually doing stuff, it's all of the tiny paper cuts that might end up harming more.
On an aggregated way. That actually makes a lot of sense to me, because look at how much effort we spend in building an FMEA, which is line by line. Literally, I've seen 500 line FMEAs, and individually, on an individual basis, each failure mode cause-effect combination might not appear to be a big deal, but there's a hidden trajectory of failures there that can ultimately lead to a big fault out there, right? So it's the interrelationship, it's the sequences, it's the connections that we fail to see if we get stuck in at such a granular level.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. This is also about having that helicopter view understanding of risk. If you look at the traditional FMEA, people assign numbers to certain levels of certain axes like severity, probability, perhaps even detectability. But have you ever tried zooming out? Literally zooming out. Take that helicopter view, look at an FMEA. There is little value in it. And then we try to summarize them. We put them into a risk matrix, and we give that the colors and the numbers, because we understand colors slightly better in a helicopter view than we do just characters that are so alike that we can't distinguish them. And we have to understand that when you're taking the overview, you need to summarize, and you need to be careful with the amount of synoptic legibility you introduce into your system, meaning you're designing the system to be able to be read from afar versus the information taking shape is actually still useful information at the detail level.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have to be able to do both, right? We have to be able to see the forest, but we also have to be able to see the trees.
And that also means that because we need to do both, we actually need to do things double. Because I don't think necessarily that you can have a single line and have meaningful information at both ends. But it takes skill, and it also takes a bit of learning at both ends to be able to see this, because there's a joke that management only understands a bar chart and a pie chart. And for stuff like this, you're already perhaps at a chloroplet level or something. If we could just develop also that level, then you might get the resources where they need to be to manage the risks, to improve good for overall society.
Yeah. And, not everyone can be good at both too. And it takes time. It takes a lot of energy and effort. And that is where the cross-functional collaborative aspect of risk management becomes so important. Is it not? That we have to build these skills and find people who have a variety of these skills to be able to do it.
Yeah. So I think that's also why I like Fu Bin Wu's initiative with the risk management maturity model. I hope something comes out of that provides for that meaningful information at the helicopter view while not being in the way of the people doing the grunt work.
Yep.
But even while that is happening, I think we need to remember this is experts building for experts and for veterans, which I see as experts who are no longer daily involved, but who have been involved and have some knowledge. But the novices, the startups, the people stepping in from another sector, they perhaps should not learn from the professors amongst us. They should perhaps start learning at least in a way that a primary school teacher would do you, with those approximations and those incomplete truths that you need so that you can develop the building blocks to come to a full view and understanding of it.
So, Gene, I'm going to ask you if you have any thoughts and ideas to share on how to actually make that happen. Because if I look around, we have a lot of training on risk management. We have a lot of webinars and even podcasts going on. How do we create an environment where learning at all levels can be accomplished in different formats? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that perhaps we should draw on the lessons, I'm going to go back to movie world, that other sectors have. And that's, if you make a story, it has to fit both people, but not everybody has to understand everything. The best kids movies are also funny to the parents because else they wouldn't go. There are jokes that children don't get. But the jokes for children aren't so annoying that the parents stay away. And when we develop training materials, we should make sure that when we're developing those, it's not only so that we have an understanding of aspects, because we seek understanding when you first build something and you write something. We then need to rewrite it to do that work double and make sure that other people can understand it. So we also need to seek to be understood. And that's something that's become very important because many people, and some of them I see present in the chat, will say, well, you've been called the professor and you have a tendency to speak a lot. But as I'm getting many opportunities to practice learning to teach risk management to those startups, I'm actually pivoting again, in my view, and that the best thing I can do is teach those startups to learn risk management in the same way that I once had the opportunity with a lot of time and a singular focus to learn risk management. But to have those mentions of everybody tells you to start with the 14971, but to be honest, it's better if you start out with usability, with the 62366, because that's where the intended use is mentioned. And if you look at the diagram, it's implied that it starts before risk management. But what is the first course everybody gets sent to? 14971. Why? Because of the definitions. What are the definitions for? Well, we don't know. We manage risk, but they don't exist. So it's perhaps pivoting to a new understanding of jargon not being approachable for new people, and us just using language that makes sense there, while when we're developing it, not losing that fine language that allows us to manage the exceptional situations. Because a risk of a transmissible public health threat, that still exists. But it should come in play when the device has the potential for it, when that hazard exists.
Yeah. So a key point I'm hearing from you is that we have to start talking about this in a jargon-free way, in a simple way, so we can understand exactly where our focus should be and how we should go about doing that. You're right. When we are so immersed into an area, we are so comfortable with the jargon ourselves that it becomes part of our speech. Gene, to be honest with you, that's exactly what we are trying to do on this Let's Talk Risk Forum, is not to turn this into a webinar or a lecture like you would find in a classroom, but more like a conversation that all of us can engage, no matter what our level of experience with risk management is. So listen, we could talk about this for hours, and we have covered a lot of ground here today, and we have almost out of time. Gene, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to process your thoughts and just think about a few key takeaway points you can share with us today. And in the meantime, guys, I want to share with you a few announcements. First of all, I'm really excited to see many of you again today. Week after week, you are showing up. So thanks a lot for showing up and being part of this community that we are building together. The main announcement I want to share with you is recently I have started working a lot with ChatGPT to analyze literally tens of thousands of adverse events in the context of recalls that happen. And my intent here is to see if we can utilize this new technology to find some new patterns that may not be obvious to us because we are lost in so much information. And to my surprise, I'm finding a lot of good stuff there, a lot of good techniques. And I have now packaged all my learning. I have prepared a couple of case studies on recent recalls, analyzing these tens of thousands of data points from Mod. And I know you're going to say, hey, Mod is not a perfect data set, but indeed, it has a lot of information. So we can look into that. And I've packaged this into a workshop that which is going to be a 4-hour hands-on workshop by Zoom. It's going to be a pilot workshop. So if you are interested in this, please let me know. Reach out to me. The date has not been fixed, but if you have an interest in just learning from what I have learned, please reach out to me and I'll share with you that information. With that, Gene, the floor is yours. Please share any key takeaways that you can come up with.
So I'll start with a tagline, and that's start with what for before why. That's a short one to remember for people. It's easy words. But the quote I'm going with is, amateurs train until they get it right, and professionals train until they cannot get it wrong. And that's two perspectives that we need to stick with. We need to develop materials so that people can work towards getting it right. And then we need to change the way that we teach people and organize stuff. So at the highest level where we need it, we can have people who cannot get it wrong. And we need to be aware that that's two different perspectives, and no one person can hold both at the same moment in their life. And we need to develop people across their life, across both perspectives.
That is amazing insight, Gene. And I think you have thrown out a challenge to the community as well. And it's my belief that we can get to it only if we engage and collaborate with each other and do all we can individually, bring our whole to this conversation and help each other out. But I love your perspective here. It's quite deep, and it'll require some reflection on our part to think about how we can play that role, which end of the spectrum, and how we can transition from one end to the other and create this community, continual learning community that we can bring this whole field forward. So I appreciate your time, Gene. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Guys, thanks for joining again. We're going to meet once again in 2 weeks from now because, as you know, we are no longer doing this show every week. We are doing it every other week. And the reason for that is I'm going to start focusing on my other format, which is a video podcast, a recorded one, not a live one. So we're going to be doing both these formats at an appropriate frequency. But with that, I want to thank you guys once again, and we will see you soon.